One of the things that really surprised me at the very beginning of Takeoff is customer service and how critical that is. You can turn somebody from a quote Karen into an evangelist with a strong customer service team. And I think people underestimate how revenue generating that can be.
Entrepreneurs are by nature risk takers, but most would still think it's crazy to invest your entire life savings in 300 gallons of rosé. Nevertheless, that's the true story of how Alix Peabody started her company, Bev. Sold online and in-store, Bev is a made-by-chicks alcohol company famous for its canned rosé. Alix says that Bev's secret to success is built on some key pillars, and the most important of which might surprise you: customer service. On this episode of Up Next in Commerce, Alix explains why e-commerce brands should be investing heavily into their customer service operations. Plus, she reveals how she is capitalizing on the huge percentage of buyers that come from mobile. Enjoy this episode.
Up Next in Commerce is brought to you by Salesforce Commerce Cloud. Respond quickly to changing customer needs with flexible e-commerce connected to marketing, sales, and service. Deliver intelligent commerce experiences your customers can trust across every channel. Together, we're ready for what's next in commerce. Learn more at salesforce.com/commerce. Hey listeners, it's Stephanie. Before we dive into this episode, I was hoping you could please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It helps spread the word about the show, and I would really love it. So please, let me know how I'm doing and give me a rating, give me a review. Let us know. All right, enjoy the episode. Welcome to Up Next in Commerce. This is your host, Stephanie Postles, co-founder at mission.org. Today on the show, we have Alix Peabody, the founder and CEO at Bev. Alix, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. It feels like the perfect environment to talk about beverages with everything that's going on.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, so much consumption in my world for sure. It's been a little bit of a crazy time.
Mine too. These days I have to limit myself. Like, wait, did I just have wine yesterday, the day before, and the day before? Like, I need to chill. I have to put myself on a plan.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's funny too, because like we've got moms with kids working from home and people trying to like separate their days and all that kind of stuff. So I feel for them, but glad we can be here to help.
Yes, me too. So I have read your backstory, a little bit of it, and you have a crazy backstory of why you started Bev. And I was hoping we could kind of start there, where you go through what led you to starting it.
Yeah. So it's kind of a crazy story. When I first moved to San Francisco, I was 24. I'd been working in finance for a couple of years, and I moved out there thinking, I wanted to learn a little bit more about the whole startup world and all that kind of stuff. And I took a job as an executive headhunter, helping startups place C-suite level employees, essentially. And right when I moved there, I got pretty sick. So I had a whole bunch of issues with my reproductive health system, and I was totally drowning in medical bills. And I was trying to figure out, how I was going to pay for all of this stuff. I had to freeze my eggs. It was a total nightmare. And I started throwing these parties, and I was charging tickets for these parties, which people didn't realize I was using to pay down a whole bunch of medical care. I went to a school that was very frat-centric. I worked in finance and I was in tech, and I've always cared a lot about gender dynamics and drinking culture and kind of how we interact with one another when our guards are down. And I started to notice that there was just a really different energy when you're in a female-owned social space. And at that point, I kind of realized that I wanted to do something that addressed that in a way that was positive and fun and approachable. So started looking around, realized that I was going to really, need a product to sell if I wanted to have a brand and a mission. And alcohol kind of seemed like the lowest common denominator. So I weirdly ended up in wine.
That's a perfect spot to land. I mean, so tell me a little bit about you come onto this decision that you want to start in the alcohol industry. What happened next?
Yeah. So, I knew nothing about booze. I knew nothing about the industry. And I really wanted to make a voice for women and we say, and good dudes, in a space where there just really hasn't been much out there. I tried to figure out, how was I going to sell this product? And there's so much legal stuff that goes into, into the industry in general. It's so hard to get on a shelf because you have to go through all of these different loopholes. So I realized that there was kind of a loophole to this system, specifically in wine. And the reason for that is basically that if you're a California vineyard, you can have a tasting room and a wine club. And so I realized pretty quickly that I was going to need to have a wine-based product if I wanted to be able to sell online so that I could have a proof of concept before trying to get onto the shelf. That's how I ended up with rosé in a can as our first product. And thank you so much. It's funny, my cousin's handwriting is actually what's on the side of the can. It was our original logo.
That's good handwriting. I would not have known that's someone's handwriting.
Yeah, we had to make our own font. It's kind of funny, but anyways, yeah, and so we, I basically at that point I realized I had a 401k from my first job that I'd kind of forgotten about. I cashed the whole thing, bought 300 gallons of rosé, and we were off to the races.
That's amazing. So where did you even send these 300 gallons of rosé?
Yeah, I mean, so I wasn't even, don't tell anyone I said this, just kidding, anyone who's listening, but I wasn't even licensed at the time when I made our first sort of proof of concept. So I wasn't allowed to sell it. Mm-hmm. I had technically purchased it from a winery under their license as a direct-to-consumer sale. And so I used the product to go seed investors, basically. And I would bring it to all of these different parties. And then a couple days later, I'd ask for an introduction from a friend to a potential angel investor. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, that stuff was everywhere, but I actually put it there. So it was kind of just like the hustle of starting to get our original round of funding.
Mm-hmm. So since you bought that 20,000 or 300 gallons of rosé for $20,000, have you changed the product? Like, is it a new, different kind of wine now? Like from where it started, where is it today?
Honestly, we hit it pretty well in the beginning. Wine is so interesting because there's so much chemistry that goes into the profile of making it. And so we'd basically done a whole bunch of blind taste tests of a bunch of different types of rosé and just went to our winemakers and we're like, build us this, mm-hmm. backwards. And so there's definitely been some fine tuning and, and making sure it's as delicious as possible and sugar-free and all that kind of stuff. But it's pretty similar to what it was at the beginning. And now we have additional products as well that all kind of have a similar profile, but are different varietals.
Very cool. And what's the strategy behind putting it in a can?
Yeah, at the beginning, people ask me this a lot because they're like, oh, cans are exploding and this is such a, new category. When I did it, it was not normal. It was super hard to find somebody who would even can it. We're talking like 3 years ago before you really saw any canned wine on the shelf. And the reason I did it was pretty practical. I had no money, right? And so I was like, how am I going to make something that is branded and that people recognize if you pour it into a glass and you don't know what it is? Right. And so, in my mind, I was like, well, if I make it kind of almost like Red Bull-esque, where it's a really identifiable can, it's cute, it's Instagram friendly, the product will start to market itself. And that's how it ended up in a can. Honestly, it was no real strategy at first. But, I also wanted to really be able to play against sort of the beer culture, which that seemed to make sense at the time.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like such a great way to get that word of mouth marketing working for you, just like it kind of worked in the beginning with investors, but also, having something that people share where it's different. Because I mean, even thinking about the amount of bottles of wine, like I wouldn't think to share one of them or even remember half the time, like where it came from or, like the brand that's behind it. So it seems like a really unique way to get people to share for you.
100%. And if it's cute enough and, fun looking enough and whatever, people want to take pictures with it and they want to be seen holding it. And I think, beverage is such an interesting category because people don't realize how emotional it is, but brands really drive a lot of the purchasing power in terms of, what people choose to consume because it says a lot about, who you are. Think about Monster versus Red Bull. It's more emotional than people realize off the bat.
I love that. So how are you going about garnering that emotion and developing that community, which seems like a very important part of why you even started this company? Like, how do you do that day to day now?
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many different ways. I think we really are a digitally native brand, which is such an overused term, but we've really been able to build out a community online and get our message across through our social platforms and all those types of things where people really know what we're about and who we are and why we exist. And originally, like last year, there was a lot of event-based marketing that we did where we had actual events that people could really get to know the brand. And obviously that all came to a quick halt in early 2020, but now we have brand ambassador programs that actually have community ways that they communicate with each other. They find people to go out with together. They find different, even housing. It's really become more than just a brand ambassador in the traditional way, but a real community where they are communicating with each other as well as with the company.
That's great. Have you seen any success with virtual things? I mean, you're mentioning the brand ambassador and building a community online, but are there other things that you kind of took your event budget and moved it over to something new to try out virtually?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a few virtual events. I think people got a little tired from them, a little early on. And I think, where we've seen a lot of word of mouth growth and that kind of thing is actually because of the form factor. It's so easy for social distancing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's an easier way to split a bottle, you don't have to split a bottle of wine, use glasses, it's sanitary, stuff like that. And so we've seen a lot of word of mouth coming from people ordering cans and being able to sit outside far apart and drink, enjoying the same thing, which has been pretty interesting and not something that I would have thought of originally when COVID hit. But that's definitely been something that's worked in our favor.
Oh, that's really interesting. Are you leaning into that trend once you started seeing it pop up, starting to create conversations around that and showing hey, look what our other customers are doing?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then in addition to that, in the what we call on premise, but bars and restaurants and stuff like that, it's so much easier for takeaway. Ordering something, being able to throw a can in a bag and and go do your thing has been something that's been helping the category all around.
So when you were building out your e-commerce platform and thinking about, building out a shopping experience to sell alcohol online, especially one that caters to women, how did you think about setting up your website in a way that someone would go there and be like, oh, I want to order this right now, or I really feel a connection with this brand? What kind of things did you implement, or personalization did you implement on the website? What things did you build out that really worked?
Yeah, I think it's funny because when we started, when we first built the website and my head of marketing, who also happens to be my husband, it's awesome. Well, that actually happened second. He was recruited once after we got married, but he was telling me we have to invest in the website. We have to invest in the website. And at the time, I didn't get it. Right. And I was like, our website looks fine. It's cute. It's whatever. Yeah. And I'm so glad that he did, because it's made frictionless buying. I've started to realize just how important that is. Things like Apple Pay and making sure that the website's easy to navigate has really converted for us. And I think the other thing, from an emotional perspective, it's been important for us to really make sure that who we are and why we are is front and center and easily accessible. And that's something that I think, people start to poke around the website and they start to really get, I mean, I hope so anyway, who we are, and that brings them into the family more. And we've seen that, our repeat purchase rates are really strong because people become such advocates of not just the product, but the brand.
That's great. How do you balance, because we've talked about this quite a bit on the show, of, brands like Bonobos, or we had Yellow Leaf hammocks on, and there's always this tricky balance between selling the brand and everything you're doing around the brand, and maybe the social good aspects or things like that, but then also selling the product and making sure people know the product's very good. How do you think about that balance, especially on a website where someone could quickly just come on there, look at something, and then hop off?
Oh, for sure. My favorite compliment is, wow, it's actually delicious, because that means I know that
Yep.
we get that all the time where it's like, oh, this is actually really good. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, duh,
Thank
I'm
you.
not going to tell you something that I wouldn't want to drink. But I
Yeah.
also love that because it means, people don't expect it to taste how it does out of a can. And it's great. But, I think focus is so important when it comes to that. And I think the way that we really try to attack marketing is making sure that the messages that we're sending aren't too many and they're very focused on what we want to do, right? So for us, it's really made by chicks, zero sugar product. Our mission is break the glass, right? Like that's kind of what we really try to hone in on. And there's a lot of A/B testing that goes into, okay, which kind of consumers are really looking at the products and are buying for the first time because of the product versus buying for the first time because of the brand and the mission. And I think a lot of the times people are going to buy a product that they're excited about or that they've heard about or that they want to try. And then, kind of become, if they like it, that's just straight table stakes. And that's when you start to see repeat and people really start to become evangelists. So it is a fine line and one that I think is constantly evolving, but something I think the team has done a pretty good job of navigating and just making sure that it's focused.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Like the brand can draw people in or the purpose can draw them in, but then you actually have to have a good product and that's how you get your repeat buyers.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's table stakes, right? If it's not delicious, if it's not actually delicious,
Yeah, actually good.
If it's not actually good, then, you're not going to get what you want.
Yep. So earlier you were mentioning about investing in the website. What were some of the biggest changes that you all made along with, you mentioned frictionless buying, but what other things did you update where you were surprised by, increases in the metrics that you were watching or performance or buying rates?
Yeah, well, everything. I mean, we had to redo the entire thing. And for us specifically, there was a lot of programming that had to go to the back end to make sure that everything was compliant because we are alcohol. There's a lot of legislation rather. And so there was a lot of build out that had to go into that, and then I think the other things that helped were having things like a chat on the site where you can reach out to customer service and these types of simple things. And we're continuing to expand on that and stuff like loyalty programs because the repeats are so strong. People want to recommend it to their friends. And there's been a lot of different things of that nature. And also just making sure that the tech stack on the back end is strong so that we're learning, right? And evolving as we see customer behavior.
So you build out this new platform, you're trying out chatbots and everything. Like what kind of metrics are you monitoring to see if things are going well? Like what do you look at every day or week?
For sure. I mean, obviously top line, we're looking at AOV, average order value, lifetime repeat rates are huge. We have a subscription service on our website as well, because people really love their wine. And so making sure we're keeping an eye on churn, things of that nature, pretty straightforward. But I think all of that is really important in understanding the health of the online business.
How do you keep customers engaged, whether they're in a subscription or they just bought for the first time? What kind of methods are you using to engage with them and keep them coming back and keep them subscribed?
We have a fair amount of email marketing that we do that we found works really well. We try to make sure that we have, content that's interactive, and I think one of the things that really surprised me at the very beginning of Takeoff is customer service and how critical that is, right? You can turn somebody from a quote Karen, if you will, into an evangelist with a strong customer service team. People underestimate how revenue generating that can be. So that's definitely been a big thing for us. And then, in addition, we've been doing SMS and a lot of things that kind of keep us top of mind without oversaturating people's inboxes and having them kind of unsubscribe or anything like that. And the other thing that I think is important is just, my husband always says this, but say what you do and do what you say, right? And so make sure that we are delivering orders on time. If we go out of stock, people will drop their subscriptions because they got their most recent one more later than they thought they would. And now it's now they have too much wine or stuff like that. So really making sure that the execution behind the marketing is there is so critical.
I want to dive a bit deeper into that, building out a good customer service team, because I think that's something that's really important that I don't see enough brands investing in. I want to hear, how do you go about building out a team like that who can, like you said, turn a Karen into a loyal customer? Like what kind of training are you giving them? How do you think about building up that team?
Yeah, so that team is really, at the end of the day, the heart and soul of the organization. And I think a lot of places make mistakes in not treating it as such. They're the voice of the brand. They're the literal person that people are communicating with. And so we actually have a policy where anyone who starts, especially on the marketing team, has to do 2 weeks of customer service. They have to understand who our customers are, how we talk to them, how we interact. It's critically important. And I think that team has to be so well trained on culture and brand voice and mission, and making sure that they're constantly getting better at getting better, right? So implementing new systems, pulling insights from our customers, seeing what they're asking for, which helps us decide what new products to develop, all of those kinds of things. And so, I think a lot of the time those positions can be undervalued. And at the end of the day, that's where you're going to get so much information and so much communication with your customer, and so much insight into what you should be building.
Yeah, I can see there being a lot of value too with, like you were mentioning, gathering that feedback and seeing what customers are asking for, seeing what the conversations are, and then kind of doing a full circle back to the team. So then they kind of know, okay, here's what other team members keep having to respond to. You probably will too. And just kind of using it as like a training method as you ingest that data, then giving it back to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that customer service team, like when you're getting all the feedback and all the data, how do you go about organizing it in a way that you can make decisions off of?
So that is really the team lead, right? And so she pulls together reports for us on a weekly basis that are major insights. The team under her flags certain things that, in different categories, whether it's major complaints that we're seeing, or major requests, or what some of the positive feedback might look like. Obviously, to me, the negative feedback is more important, right? Because that's where the real learnings are going to be. But we have a system of tagging in various categories to make sure that we're pulling those insights into the metrics that we find important. And if people are choosing to cancel, why are they choosing to cancel? Things like that. And so that's reported up, and we have, a consumer insights meeting at least every other week.
Yep, that's cool. What's one of the most surprising insights or complaints that you've gotten that you were like, oh, I wouldn't have expected that?
Unfortunately, some of the ones that I've found to be the most upsetting are, people who like the product but don't agree with how we communicate about the social issues we care about.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's been a tough line, because, we're here with a very specific mission and purpose, and, and we're about women and men treating each other right and addressing toxic masculinity in a happy way. And, we're very clear about our communication around things like sexual assault in our industry, and, and date rape culture and all of that kind of stuff. And, I've had moments where people write and they're like, keep your views to yourself. I would have kept drinking your product otherwise.
Oh my gosh. Well, I am happy that you guys stood up to those people, because I think there's going to be room for more brands to start speaking up against crazies. Because right now I do feel like a lot of brands actually sometimes get bullied by whoever's loudest on the internet. And I think there's a lot of room for more brands to speak up like that behind the decisions that they're making, instead of just conceding to the loudest person on the internet, which might not even represent the majority.
100%. I mean, the loudest people are the ones that drive conversation a lot of the time. And, and I think brands fail when they try to be everything to everyone. Yeah. And we're, that's not a brand, that's just a thing. And we are who we are, and we care about what we care about. And that's where you're going to be the difference between a product and a brand that has real lasting power.
I love that. That's a good quote. So with everything that's going on with the pandemic, have you seen buying behaviors change? Or like earlier when you were mentioning about reasons people are canceling? Like, have you seen new reasons pop up for, why they're canceling that were different than months ago, or why they're buying that's very different than 6 months ago?
Yeah, I mean, 6 months ago, we definitely had more people, it was harder to get people to buy alcohol online, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's generally, you're going from one place to another. It's oftentimes an impulse purchase. You're on your way to a friend's house or on your way to a party. I would say we've seen an uptick in the way people are purchasing our products more than we've seen some of the difficulties that other brands are seeing during the pandemic, because they don't want to go out. This is not something that historically people buy in a forward-looking sort of predetermined fashion, if that makes sense. And that's changed. They want things at home. They don't want to have to really think about it, and they're not going out as much. And so that's been huge for us, where we've actually seen a huge lift in online purchasing and online subscription.
Great. And how are you guys leveraging mobile? I know earlier you had mentioned SMS, and like, how do you think about that, especially when it comes to mobile ordering?
We definitely do SMS marketing. Like I said before, making sure that the mobile experience on our website, we have, honestly, I believe it's about 70 to 80% of purchases are made on mobile.
Oh, wow. That's
which is crazy.
On your website?
Yeah, on our website on mobile, which is pretty nuts. Yeah. And I was really surprised by that. But people are buying on their phones because they're seeing it on Instagram and TikTok and, all of these different outlets where they're sitting on their phone and they're clicking through. And so making sure that process is seamless has been really important.
That's huge. That's a very big number. I wouldn't have expected it to be that high on your website. So where are these customers coming from? Like, what are your best channels right now where you're getting the most customers from?
So we've seen a lot of success. We're really trying to kind of diversify away from just Facebook and Instagram, though obviously that's a big funnel for many brands, but it becomes addictive and it can be fickle and expensive. And so we're really trying to diversify different ways that we acquire customers that are more organic, whether, again, that's our brand ambassador program, influencer programs. We've actually seen a lot of success on TikTok, and that's not paid because we're alcohol, so we can actually advertise on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that has to be organic and influencer driven. And funnily enough, I was pretty surprised, but we've seen a fair amount of return on podcast advertising as well.
Oh, that makes sense, because podcast listening is up, as we know. So yeah, that makes sense for that to work out well.
Yeah, and our email marketing is pretty strong. So once people are in the funnel, we do see a fair amount of lift with emails, and just making sure that all of it's on brand, and the brand voice is really consistent and makes people feel like we're not just a bot, but we're real people that are reaching out to them. We've found to be something that consumers get excited about.
That's cool. So earlier you just mentioned about influencers and TikTok. How are you going about partnering with influencers? Like, who do you find to be the best influencer? Like, how do you find those people and how do you work with them? Because we've had a lot of listeners ask about working with influencers, and not like, people don't really understand, like, how do you start those relationships? Do they actually have a good ROI? Like, how do you find good ones? So yeah, let's dive into that a bit.
It's tough, right? And I think we're in a very lucky position because nobody's going to say no to free product from us.
Okay. So that's how you get them in. You offer them free products.
For the most part, it's like, do you want to try this out? Here's what we're all about. Here's who we are. Making sure that those interactions are direct and actually a real person, right? Like, not templating things, doing your research on, what these people are about, who their consumers or following is, rather, how engaged they are, really doing your homework and being thoughtful in the way that you partner. And I'm a huge advocate of quality over quantity. So I would rather have a longer term partnership with a fewer number of people where it's kind of where they're repeating, rather than just like one huge post from a large scale influencer. We've seen bigger ROIs on the smaller people with the higher engagement.
Yep. Yeah, I've heard that same theme. Is there a certain level where you're like, up until this point, like, if they have this many followers or less, free product will win them over? And then after this point, then they're just going to be looking for money or something else. Like, is there a certain barrier maybe?
It varies. It really varies because I think, for us, people get excited about us for different reasons, and kind of as I mentioned before, whether it's product, whether it's the mission, and they kind of just want to get behind it, whether it's just being part of the community, right? And so we've seen people want to post and engage for all sorts of different reasons. There isn't really a fine math to it.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the more sort of macro the influencer is, we found the more that they want to get paid, but also it really depends on who it is. But by and large, I would say that the returns are not as good.
Yeah, that's good to know. So what is a favorite piece of content that either you've created or an influencer has created where you're like, this was either really fun or funny or drove a lot of, purchases? Anything come to mind?
So we have a small kind of silly thing that we do that's we have like this weird subcult of grandmas drinking Bev.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Which is kind of funny. And so there's this one influencer we've worked with called Ms. Patty Cake, and she's done like the funniest content for us where, she's this like fab grandma and she'll like dress up in full extra clothes and, be drinking our cans of wine and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's one of my personal favorites, whether it's the one that drives the most traffic. Another partnership that we did that's been really great is Serena Kerrigan, her Instagram show. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
I'm not. Tell me about it.
Yeah, totally. So during quarantine, she basically created like the first reality television show on Instagram. Mm-hmm. And she started going on live dates on Instagram Live with random guys from her house. Uh-huh. And it became such a funny sort of culty following thing where people would just log in. It's actually on Wednesdays at 8:30 most of the time for, just to watch her go on a date. And whether it's like, whether she goes on a second date or whatever. And so we sponsored her for her second season. And I think that's one of the big things too. It's like the bigger the influencer is, the more brands they're working with. And we really like to find people who are fun and own themselves and, very like mission aligned and empowered that are earlier and up and coming. We found that to just be way more effective.
Oh, that's great. I need to go and watch that. That sounds really funny. How did you find her and how do you find these smaller people? Because that always seems like the hardest part for me anyways, when I like think about like, oh, go find a influencer who has a good following and these people will actually want what she has or he has, but they're not too big where they, don't ask for crazy things. Like, how do you find those people?
That is a great question. And, the team is really good at that.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily doing that all myself these days, but I would say that, it's especially tough for younger brands because there is such a capacity constraint in terms of time. And it really, really is a full-time job keeping your finger on the pulse on what's going on social, right? And I think it changes so quickly. What people are doing online changes so quickly. I mean, it can change in a day, right? And making sure that you're responding without losing your authenticity, and also just being engaged with your consumers and who are they following and what are they excited about, and seeing if those audiences are like-minded people. And so it's a lot of keeping your finger on the pulse, and frankly, it's a lot of time.
What are you seeing when you sponsor a series on Instagram like that, where it's more product placement, where it might not be something that person's referencing, but it's just kind of in the scene, versus the ROI on a platform, maybe like TikTok, where they're probably putting it more front and center. Like that's what their post is about. Like what kind of ROI should someone expect when utilizing those two different methods?
I mean, honestly, it varies because, a lot of the time in TikTok, it's not necessarily just about what the product is. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time it is something that they just happen to be drinking while they're saying something funny. And then they might like off the cuff mention it. Whereas on Instagram, you're looking at more of a hard post, and you can track the ROIs with, specific codes that you're giving, influencers and stuff like that. So it's something that I think we're really trying to fine tune in terms of how do you track those ROIs in an effective way. But for us, we've seen that, TikTok engagement in particular is really interesting because it's still newer and the algorithms aren't as tightly figured out as Instagram is, from kind of what we've started to see. And so the ROIs can be much higher. Again, it totally varies, and it really depends on the content of the person.
Got it. That makes sense. Are you working on any new crazy things, like crazy marketing campaigns or channels that you're trying out, or anything where you're like, I have no idea if this will work, but we're going to try it?
Absolutely. I mean, we're really trying to build out our own content marketing platforms. We launched a podcast that did quite well, that I was actually the host of, that's called
Nice.
Made by Chicks. And
Cool.
and so figuring out, we're trying to build out more of, what does our newsletter look like? How are we bringing value add content to people? And how are we doing it in a way that's not necessarily just sales emails, but really, addressing who we are and giving people value add outside of our product alone, right? And so that's one of the big challenges that I think we're going to see in 2021 is, how do we build that in a way that has a strong ROI, and what do those ROIs look like, and is there, what kind of partnerships can we get involved with, and these types of things is something that we're really going to focus on for next year to get away from the Instagram addiction, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's good to start exploring new things like that. And yeah, we work with companies all the time who are thinking about building podcasts or, sponsoring podcasts. And it's definitely a good avenue to explore because it's only increasing. At least podcasting is only increasing the amount of people listening.
For sure.
All right. So let's move over to the lightning round. This is where I'm going to ask you a question and you have a minute or less to answer. Are you ready, Alix?
I am so ready.
All right. First, we'll start with the hard one. What one thing will have the biggest impact on e-commerce in the next year?
I think the biggest thing that will have an impact on e-commerce is the social climate.
Tell me a bit more.
I think it really depends on sort of what happens with COVID and civil unrest and all of those types of things, because that's what really starts to clog up people's feeds. And they're seeing a lot of that. And so that's where we see, CACs increase dramatically, is when there's a lot going on in the world around. That's what I would say.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah, that's a good one. What's up next on your reading list?
Never Split the Difference, which is a negotiation book from, I believe it's a CIA interrogator.
Yeah, we just had someone else recommend that. I think it was just a couple episodes
really?
ago. Yeah, that's a popular book. I'll have to definitely check it out now. What's up next on your Netflix queue?
Oh, I mean, obviously The Crown, but but definitely watching that. The Queen's Gambit was amazing too.
Yes, I'm watching The Queen's Gambit right now. It's so good.
It's amazing.
I'll have to check out The Crown. I haven't seen that one yet though. I always just take recommendations from our guests, and that's what guides my Netflix queue from all you guys. So
well, yeah, I would love any recommendations, because I feel like the whole world has just straight up run out of Netflix.
I know. Yeah, we got to make more content. We need it.
Exactly. Give the people what they want. Netflix and Bev.
What one thing do you not understand today that you wish you did?
I wish I had a better grasp on American history. I went to high school abroad, and so I actually missed my junior year when you were supposed to take American history. And so I was taking history abroad. So I actually don't have a great background in that. And I really wish I did, especially right now.
Ooh, that's a good one. Because they always say history repeats itself. And yeah, that's something
It
I
does.
need to dive into deeper as well.
It does indeed. I wish I were better at like reading biographies and historical books, but I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, there's so much going on right now, but that's a good thing to lean into. And the last one, what piece of tech is making you most efficient right now?
Superhuman, the email.
Oh, do you like it?
Yeah, I love it. It's definitely helped with my efficiency dramatically. Yeah, otherwise, I wish I could say Asana. My team uses it very well. I'm a little bit of the slow adapter, but Superhuman has been really awesome.
Oh, cool. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I've heard so much about it, and it might be something I need to check out next. All right, Alix, it's been awesome having you come on the show. Where can people find out more about you and Bev?
Absolutely. So you can check us out at drinkbev.com and follow us on Instagram at drinkbev, and subscribe to our newsletters.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Hey listeners, thanks for tuning into this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It helps spread the word, and I would greatly appreciate it. See you next time.
Up Next in Commerce is brought to you by Salesforce Commerce Cloud and created by the team at mission.org. Subscribe now at Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.